Welcome to this edition of Trader Talk TV. Today we've got Joe from Xandr in the office. Joe, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Great to be here.
Great stuff. Today we're talking about ppid, which is Publisher Provided ID. I nearly got that wrong. Publisher Provided ID. And it's a standard that's being used in the industry at the minute for monetizing zero ID, which we'll go into in a minute. But we're here to talk about the applications in the ecosystem. And Joe has kindly come into the office today to talk about how Xandr is using ppid to help both publishers and buyers. So Joe, before we do that, just introduce yourself, say what you do down in Xandr, please.
Sure thing. So first, it's great to be here. I'm a solutions consultant at Xandr, so working in a technical capacity with our clients from the sell side specifically. This is a product specifically that's kind of new to us.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to talk about it today.
Okay. So before we go into the ppid thing, I wanted to just kind of lay the landscape right now. It's become very difficult for publishers to monetize audiences, particularly those that I would describe as zero ID or consentless. So let's talk about the current state of play, Joe. It's a difficult time for publishers to monetize those audiences.
Yeah. So the current landscape, in short, there's still, in a summary, there's still a lot of reliance on third-party cookies. So it feels sometimes like on the open web, Chrome is lifting a lot of the heavy burden.
Right.
There are solutions coming up and have been, increasing in scale when it comes to the environments that block third-party cookies, like Safari and Firefox. So the solution there is essentially to use logged-in-based IDs.
Yeah.
Which the value proposition for that is pretty clear.
Yeah.
I think. The open question with those is how much is it going to scale?
Yeah.
Right.
Scale is the issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we? So I'm going to just come up with a number here. Let's say 85% of the open web won't be logged in.
Yeah.
This is completely theoretical, but that's a huge chunk, right? So what do we do in this case once third-party cookies are gone? We're going to basically have 85% of the internet or open web non-addressable.
Yeah.
So outside of the login-based ID front, publishers have been over the last couple of years taking a kind of an active role to start providing identifiers to the programmatic ecosystem.
Yeah.
Those are first-party IDs. So they basically become kind of the data provider in this context.
Yeah.
So they provide an ID as well as the segments. There's still not a lot of taxonomy or universal alignment on this. So it's kind of like a bit of chaos at the moment. But it kind of gives an opportunity for publishers to start taking an active role of providing addressability.
So there are solutions coming to the market. So one of these solutions, as you alluded to, was the ppid.
Yeah.
So let's go into detail on that. Sketch out what is ppid, why is it important for publishers,
Yeah.
and particularly the application of it in terms of monetizing what I call zero ID audiences, which is basically anybody who hasn't got an ID or consentless or passerby, as you said, non-logged in users. So let's talk about ppid. What is it?
Yeah, sure. So before we talk about what it is, I think it's important to take a little bit of a step back and kind of set the scene of what publishers today, especially the savvy ones, are doing, right?
Yeah.
Let's just quickly go here. So this is a savvy publisher.
Yeah.
Let's call it Pub1. They have their users. They have more than two, but this is just a start. These users access this publisher, regularly, and publisher over time accumulates a lot of data on those users in terms of behavioral, contextual, where they spend their time, etc. And associate these users, they become IDs in the eyes of the publisher, right? So let's just call them ppIDs here. So these are ppIDs. So these users become ppIDs. You become, as a publisher, you start having the ability to get segments on your users, right? So how do you make use of that in the programmatic side? Because you've been using that as a publisher in your sponsorships, in your direct deals, in the non-programmatic side quite a lot, and you've been using that in deals potentially. So it's still between you and yourself only as a publisher. So how do we start expanding beyond that and making that available to the buy side? Yeah. Basically enabling the buy side to use your data more. So let's assume this publisher is using ppid, which is the most popular among publisher header bidding solutions. So they would use something called the pub provided ID module to start passing this these PPIDs, essentially, these users, to their preferred SSP. Let's design SSP here.
Yeah.
So in the old days, this would have meant nothing for the SSP because the SSP just wants to get their own ID. They just drop a user sync pixel on the page, get their own ID, which is a cookie-based ID, and then they are like, okay, now I have a matched ID, right? So in this environment, let's just say these users are actually accessing Safari. This is a Safari logo.
It's very good.
Pretty good, right? So they're accessing the Safari web browser. Publisher has access to that ID, even if it's Safari, of course, because that's their own bread and butter. That's their first-party cookies. Yeah. First-party cookies are here to stay. They're not going away. So these, what we're starting to build here is the ability for publishers to become a bit of a data provider. So they pass PPID to the SSP plus the segments that they have.
And the segments can be the seller-defined audiences, contextual, that type of thing. Is that so? Where SDA comes into play?
Yeah, so they can be literally anything that the publisher is collecting over time. So it could be like super broad, like SDA, for example. Yeah. Which is a very exciting project and could be interesting for this. But also could be very tailored audiences that are bespoke for a specific opportunity, specific high opportunity for like a brand or a buyer. So
just to clarify here, it's effectively a first-party cookie augmented with specific data points that the publisher has got on that user, but it's only specific to the publisher's domain.
Exactly.
As in, like, they pass to the SSP buys on theguardian.com or ft.com, and it's much more. It's basically aligned to that specific domain, not cross-device, not cross-domain, etc.
100%. Yeah. So the only like little gotcha there is that the publisher might have a multiple domains on their inventory. Of course. And they might have like a bit of a single sign-on thing for convenience. Yeah. They could have like multiple, a stitched ID within their own ecosystem if there's an email. But primarily, I imagine this will be first-party cookie-based. Okay, interesting. So what about the likes of measurement in that instance? Is it all done using that specific segment, or that specific ID? Yeah. How does that work? Yeah. So I don't have enough room to go for DSP there, ideally, but let me just put it here and create this fork to have multiple DSPs here. So DSP1, DSP2, and DSP3. Yeah. So the PPID is also passed to these guys. Yeah. And then it's a case of what can these guys do with it? Right. Or is the publisher going to share these segments or not? Okay. Can these DSPs even read the segments directly or not? Or do they need some kind of like sharing access or something else to do that? But when it comes to end-to-end platforms like Xandr, for example, we can directly share the segments like this. Okay. So let's just imagine this is Xandr SSP and Xandr DSP. We can collect the PPID plus segments directly. So and this is still within the complete control of the user, of the publisher, sorry. Yeah. So the publisher uses the SSP as a kind of like a control layer to dictate like who's going to actually get these. These guys aren't going to get it, for example. You can just say this buyer or this DSP can get access to my PPID. Okay. So at the minute, are these DSPs set up for this type of thing? How nascent is PPID in this instance? Is it still relatively new that DSPs are trying to figure out? Because the biggest problem in ad tech is that a lot of the ad tech ecosystem wants to match IDs, wants to match cookies so they can make money. But I've always thought that Xandr was ahead of the curve anyway on this stuff, and using this interesting and, to be honest, very, very intuitive sort of process. You're introducing a ability to buy a user, albeit on a first-party basis. But in the rest of the ecosystem, isn't set up yet, Joe, or is it still? So I would say you mentioned you used the word nascent. That's how I would use it. Nascent is the word I would use. There's not a lot of players that are ready to use this. Yeah. But I imagine there's going to be a lot more interaction there because right now it's kind of like an experimentation phase with this. Like we have stuff live going on with this. Yeah. I imagine there's other players doing similar things with different publishers and us potentially. But they like DSPs will need to eventually figure out what are we going to do for this 85% 100% zone? So well, I was going to say 100% of 80% is I don't know what that is. Pretty much. So like yes, you'll have the contextual solutions. You'll have like advanced solutions that use modeling, for example. Yeah, probabilistic modeling. But you will need an identifier to make things more granular,
Yeah.
more specific, and
Yeah.
actually enhance those other solutions.
Yeah.
Like contextual solutions could be enhanced by the presence of a PPID.
And the cool part about this now is that there's so much you can do in terms of application around this. Okay, first party, privacy first, it's amazing, but the scale issue is a huge problem. Now, let's talk about what Xandr's thinking about doing, because you are the kings of curation at the minute. So
Apparently.
talk about how you see this scaling. So let's talk about how a buyer could scale a PPID deal, basically.
Yeah, so what we looked at before was a very zoomed in view, right?
Yeah.
It was one publisher with their data, passing it to, it was like one DSP at a time. So a trader isn't going to negotiate this.
No, you can't
with-
have about 100
yeah,
publishers in a deal, like, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Sorry, negotiating 100 deals in a row.
100 email threads.
Yeah.
Like that's not scalable.
No.
So there needs to be a bit of setup that allows the simplicity to remain for the
Yeah.
trader. We
Yeah.
don't want to overcomplicate their
Yeah.
lives, right? So imagine that setup that we had before was like a very zoomed in view.
Yeah.
And let's zoom out here. So we're gonna have one box for publisher 1,
Yeah,
another box for publisher 2,
yeah,
another box for publisher 3,
yeah.
and so on and so forth.
And each of them are using their own instance of PPID, yeah?
Yes, and their own segments, and
Yes,
they're feeding
their
that
own-
into a centralized SSP again.
Okay. Which could be Xandr or could be others.
Exactly. Like the methodology here isn't it's pretty. I imagine it will be standardized.
Yeah,
So again, let's clarify here. There's PPID set plus segments.
yeah,
Again, we're not talking about matching PPIDs to different publishers. We're literally just saying this publisher is sending their own unique publisher provided ID. This other publisher is doing the same thing.
Do you
So it's
imagine a
unique.
lot of this would be standardized in terms of like trying to so like obviously publisher 1 would have interesting segments around a specific user
For
up
sure.
to, so do you think there'll be some kind of standardization piece across that will allow you to kind of like build that into a central
I
piece?
imagine so, and like we're already seeing applications of this in seller-defined audiences,
Okay.
right? What we
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
about before SDA, that was
Yeah,
what
yeah.
we're talking about. So it's like a project to make wider segments, more creating a standard for like the wider reach segments,
Yeah.
so that many publishers, 20 plus publishers, could basically use the same taxonomy to define
Okay,
it.
so we get to the SSP,
Yeah.
right? What happens next?
So if we do just this, that still means that the trader will have to have 20 email threads with all the publishers.
Yeah, and we don't want
So
that.
we don't want that. So we're just gonna essentially make sure we use our curation module here
Yeah,
to package all this up.
yeah,
So the curate, essentially UI or the platform, sits between SSP and all the DSPs.
yeah,
So it can, before the SSP sends the requests to all the DSPs, essentially, you can run it through curate to package all of that up.
yeah,
So we can package all of the, for example, all the SDA segments into like a deal ID. Let's suppose that all these publishers have sports pages or sports content and sports users. They package all these up into like the SDA sports segment. Curate bundles all of these. It will be like 30, 40, 50 deals, whatever it is, or even segments, into one SDA deal ID,
Right.
or even better, a segment.
Okay.
This is where we're talking about end-to-end platforms. So our SSP and our DSP can use the same segments.
So we, hypothetically, pub 1, right?
Yeah.
Sports enthusiast, pub 2 sports enthusiast, pub 3 sports enthusiast, pub
Yeah.
4 sport, or even more granular given the time of the year, tennis enthusiast, tennis, right? They're sending out their PPID plus their segments into this SSP, right? You're taking all of those different elements and curate and saying, is there a way to kind of to look at a scaled buy for a specific user? So it may be someone selling strawberries or cream,
Yeah.
or whatever, or champagne sellers because it's Wimbledon, and you can curate that via an SDA or some other segment into a sort of buy a tennis enthusiast.
Yeah.
The DSP buys that tennis enthusiast, and then the impressions are allocated across all the different publishers. Is that correct?
Exactly. And
Okay.
whoever has a curation seat and has relationship with these publishers
Right.
can put this into place.
So you think that there's going to be, the fascinating thing is Xandr does sort of help a lot of innovation because you do have a lot of external clients that do some cool stuff with you around the curation piece.
Correct.
Do you imagine there'll be some interesting companies here that will probably evolve the SDA model into something very, very interesting from a buyer's perspective and from a publisher perspective?
For sure, because they would be adding a lot of value.
Yeah.
They'll basically be operating in the 85% space that we talked about before.
The zero ID space, as we call
Exactly.
it. Zero ID people. Yes.
The zero ID people, and like, and basically they'll be adding a lot of value in that space
Yeah.
for both sides.
Yeah.
Like publishers will be ideally generating net new income sources, revenue sources.
Yeah.
And buyers will be discovering users that they've been potentially neglecting for years because there haven't been cookies. There have been no third-party.
This is very exciting. I mean, this is the type of stuff that we would like to see in the industry that we haven't seen so far. The entire industry is obsessed with IDs, and then suddenly something very sort of intuitive like this that is privacy first and has the user / people as the sort of front of mind in terms of the way they're treated and the way their data is treated, and using sort of an interesting innovation from the IB, which is SDA, to apply that, you could actually scale some interesting buys, particularly across the 85. And it must be noted that heavily indexed to IDs in Chrome is not going to help you scale or hit the audience you want, because, as you said, Joe, 85% of the audience isn't using cookies.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would love to add here is that the publishers, I think I've floated that idea before, but the publishers in this model become the data providers.
Interesting.
And can also, this allows them to engage into trust-based transactions with the buyers, because they're basically saying,
now, what do you mean by trust-based?
well, basically, as a publisher, you're willing to share, right, this data, this valuable identifier and these valuable segments to a specific buyer.
Right.
And you're not broadcasting that, to be very clear. You're literally controlling who gets access to that. So it kind of is a much closer situation than today, where the buyers.
So do you think that's the closeness of publishers and agencies is going to happen in that instance, because you can do a lot of interesting customized deals?
Exactly.
So,
you can find a competitive advantage with this.
Right. Okay. Are you seeing any of this happen at the minute? Are any of your clients kind of dangling their feet in the water, so to speak?
So we are seeing the previous zoomed-in model. We're kind of creating essentially the building blocks for this to take off at some point.
Right.
And we have the tools to do this. It's just a matter of getting more engagement from here. Once a ppid feature on our side becomes more generally available. Right now it's kind of in a beta phase. And once we kind of get more and more buy-in from the sell side, the buy side, I imagine, will get a lot more interest in this. We're already starting to float the ppid concept to the buy side, and there's
what's their reaction been so far? Interested? Or?
There's definite interest because it allows them to discover inventory that they haven't been engaging in before.
Okay, interesting.
And it also going back to the competitive advantage piece that I said. It allows certain savvier buyers to essentially engage in a specific pocket that their competitors are ignoring, pockets of inventory.
And some of the DSPs can work on your curation tool as well, I guess.
Yeah, of course, yeah. We're plugged into pretty much all the major DSPs.
Well, Joe, this has been a wonderful Trader Talk, a very optimistic Trader Talk. See, people, there is life after the cookie. And Joe, thank you for running us through this week's sort of Trader Talk TV. And we'll do more of this, and we guys evolve this. We want to talk a bit more about this. This is brilliant.
For sure.
So, Joe, thank you for your time today.
Thanks.
And that was Trader Talk TV, and we'll see you next time.